Hey guys, welcome back. It's Ripe again, back with more family drama stories. In this video, my spoiled golden child sister is out of jail and now demands that I give her my house because I don't deserve a good life. Let's dive right into the video. The title story starts like this. My sister was spoiled our entire lives and it led to her thinking that she could really do anything she wanted. She met a guy and had 2 kids with him, but whenever I saw her with them, it was clear that she did not really want to do anything with the kids or cared about being a mother. They were taken care of because of their father, but once she left him, things went south extremely quickly. I don't know all the details, but she was caught leaving them in the car while she decided to go inside of a bar and try and flirt with the other guys and get drunk. Luckily, she was stopped relatively soon after driving drunk with the kids in it, however, not before also crashing the car into another vehicle. She then even attempted to attack a police officer. Police arrested her on child endangerment and assault of a police officer charges. She did not think it was a big deal and our parents defended her, saying that every parent makes mistakes and she should not suffer because of that. Well, she got sent to jail and the father got full custody of the kids. In some stories this would be the end, but it is only the beginning here because she got out of jail and my parents still saw her as their perfect daughter no matter what I tried to say to them about her. I did not really speak to her while she was in jail or go visit her. This got me labeled as being a horrible brother by my family, which was par for the course with my parents anyway. They clearly preferred her over me, so I learned to stop caring a long time ago. She got out and was living with my parents, but apparently having a lot of issues there when it came to following her parole rules and just getting along in general. Basically, she felt like she needed a space of her own and that the minimum wage job parole forced her to get would only let her afford some dingy little apartment. I, on the other hand, had a degree, a good job and a small house. It was nothing crazy and I was far from being rich, but I was financially stable and I didn't need to worry too much about money unless I was trying to save up for something big. My parents called me and started asking me random questions about my house, like the square footage and the kind of area around it. I knew they were up to something, but I could not put my finger on it, so I just decided to ask. Me, Mom, what is with all the weird questions about the house? Mom, well, you know that your sister has been having a hard time living here with us. Me, okay. Mom, we thought that she needed some space for herself and it would be good for her after what happened to her. Me, she would not really get more space with me than she has with you. Mom, well, I was thinking you could move somewhere smaller since it is just you after all. Me, are you kidding me right now? You want me to just give her my house and say it so casually, like you are asking me to lend her $5. This is my home, Mom. Mom, can't you have some sympathy for her? Me, honestly no, she deserved to go to jail and you should be more angry that she could have gotten your only grandchildren killed. She's a spoiled brat and now you want me to give her my house thinking it would help anything. Forget about it. I hung up the phone, but things were not done because my sister decided that she had to have some words with me as well. Also explaining that it was a house and I was only one person, so that it was doing bad for space. I reminded her what the whole family knew, which was that I was engaged and my fiancé was in the process of getting ready to move in with me. I reminded her that unlike her, I was trying to have a real family. Sister, you don't deserve a family. And you cannot even care about the one you were born with. I'm your flesh and blood and need one thing from you and you cannot even do that. Me, I'm not giving you my house. I don't care what mom or dad told you I was gonna do. I own the house, it's my call, and I say no. Sister, you're going to make a horrible parent if you have kids. I hope you know that. Me, well, at least I won't only be allowed supervised visits once a month. Yeah, I know it was kind of a low blow to bring that kind of thing up, but she had gotten on my last nerve. It did not work though, because even though my parents backed off my sister didn't understand the meaning of no, she kept calling me and starting up to try and get me to just give in and let her have my house. I decided that I was going to teach her a lesson to show her once and for all that she couldn't just have everything she wanted. First, I was gonna call her and act like I'd actually given up and was willing to let her have the house, then told her everything that was going to need to go into it and how much was going to be her responsibility. I sent her breakdowns of the monthly payments for the house and then for the electricity, water and gas. She started saying that she shouldn't have to pay for any of that because it was my house. I told her that I was putting it in her name and she was now responsible for it. She started freaking out and breaking down that she couldn't afford that and would end up homeless. I reminded her that if she didn't have a stable place to live, then she would probably end up being sent back to jail. She started freaking out even more because of that. I hung up and let her stew in her panic of realizing that owning a home was not easy like she assumed. She told me to forget about giving her the house and I told her okay, I would do her a favor and take my own house back. My parents, who were not idiots, chastised me for trying to teach her a lesson and reminding me that I was not her parent. Well, I bit my tongue instead of saying if they did their job teaching her as a parent, I would not have to do this. Well, she stayed living with them for a while until she met another guy and started staying out days at a time and basically disappearing. She stole money from my parents and was drinking and doing drugs against her parole terms. I only knew this because I was in contact with her kid's father, as I actually cared about my niece and nephew and wanted to stay in their lives. He's a really cool dude who clearly just wants the kids to be safe. After she messaged me a few times hitting me up for money and once again wanting to take my house, but with me paying for everything, I just blocked her. I decided that I was not going to have any more contact with her, and my parents refused to do the same despite the things she did to them. Well, I made it clear that I wouldn't go for family gatherings if she was gonna be there. I spent that next Christmas with her children instead, who she was now not allowed to see at all anymore. I got them gifts and was glad to see that they were going to be raised as much better people than their mother. They had her eyes and face, but were not going to get her foul personality. And the next one is a malicious compliance story. Happened at my last job, was reminded of it this morning. So the backstory, I worked in a middle management position that coordinated an after-hours care program for adults. I had a micromanaging dinosaur for a boss, let's call her Hetty. Hetty oversaw the day operation as well, and I shared an office with the direct manager of that program. Given they operated at different times, we often shared clients, but as I did my admin work during business hours, I often briefly visited the clients in their day activities to ask them about their preferred activities for my program. I had no real opportunity to consult them at any other time, particularly as Hetty decreased my allotted admin time further and further. She just loved tightening the noose and took particular delight in nobody ever being able to get comfortable in their role, firmly believing that if she kept us all on our toes, she would get more work out of us. It was stressful and incredibly draining. Another strict rule of Hetty's was that despite female staff being allowed to provide personal care, aka showers, changing, etc. to male clients, she did not allow male staff to provide intimate care to female clients. This will be important to the story, and yes, I'm fully aware this was gender discrimination and I argued the point multiple times, but I was just overruled. The only thing Hetty loved more than setting arbitrary rules was catching us out breaking them. It was near impossible to work the position without breaking any of her rules, one of which was that I was not allowed to involve myself in the day service. Involvement basically constituted me being anywhere out of my office and near clients during the day. She would sneak quietly around the building, listening around corners, and then leap out suddenly to catch the so-called offender. One day, one of the clients would be transitioning from the day activities straight into my program for the evening. The entire premise of the program was client choice, and as such I needed to know what my client would like to cook for dinner so that I could purchase groceries before I clocked off. I was discussing it with the client when Hetty zoomed in around the door and asked to see me in her office. She dressed me down for interfering in the other program and told me in no uncertain terms that I was to stay completely away from it and in my own lane, or I would be facing disciplinary action. Well, fine with me. I knew it would come back to bite her. Mere days later, the day program was winding up for the day, with only a few late-staying clients remaining, along with one male worker. One of the female clients had a need for a change of clothing. The male worker came and knocked on the door of my office to let me know the client needed changing. Cue the malicious compliance. Worker, Jane needs a change of clothes. Me loudly, knowing Hetty was next door in her office with the door wide open. Oh, I'm sorry, I would love to help, but unfortunately, you're currently working with the day program and I've been expressly instructed that I'm not allowed to interfere. Maybe Hetty can help, I'm sure she's in her office. Worker, knowing all too well the crap we put up with from Hetty, gives me a sly grin and moves on to Hetty's office to interrupt a phone call she was having because hey, the client comes first. I dutifully stayed at my desk listening to her ask the worker to seek my assistance, knowing full well that she heard every word of the previous conversation. The worker then repeats my refusal to her and she goes off after much grumbling to assist the client. Of course, Hetty ripped me a new one for not being a team player later on. I simply pointed out her insistence earlier in the week that I not involve myself in any way with the other service. She scoffed and told me that I was being deliberately obtuse, and of course, if there was a need, I was duty-bound to meet it. I reiterated that it was impossible for me to know which tasks would be deemed dutiful, and therefore innocently followed her instructions to the letter. She had nothing to come back with on this occasion. It did unfortunately escalate her bullying with me, but it was on that trajectory regardless. I ultimately burned out a couple years later and had to leave, but that one act of malicious compliance remains a bright spot in what was otherwise almost a decade of appalling treatment. I have been in a new role for over 2 years now where I have incredibly supportive management and colleagues. However, I still see Hetty around and every time I flip her the bird. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you have ever been in a similar horrible work situation, I would be very interested in hearing about it. Maybe others can relate to your experience and we can all learn something. Either way, if you enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, since that would help me tremendously. The next one is another malicious compliance story. Many years ago, I worked in aged care as a personal care assistant, the lowest rung of nursing staff, basically responsible for all the physical labor, such as showering residents, assisting them to go to the toilet, getting them in and out of bed, that sort of thing. I loved my job, and I genuinely did, and for a while worked at an agency going from place to place before getting poached by a specific nursing home, which is where the malicious compliance in the story takes place. I'd been working there for about a month, doing 4 days a week, all afternoons 3 to 10 p.m, and 2 of those afternoons were back-to-back Wednesday and Thursday, and this is where the other nurse comes into play. Every second Wednesday, without fail, she would call in about 20 minutes before her shift, the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. overnight shift, was due to begin, leaving no time to get agency staff in to take over. Now, I could wait until they arrived, but by the time they got there, it would likely be after 12 and my trains home would not be running, so in the end I took on a double shift 3 p.m. to 7 a.m, leaving me tired mentally and physically trying to get home on a packed morning rush hour train. So basically not much fun, but given the other option was to leave my residence without proper care, and that would never ever happen. So this meant that by the time I got home, it was around 9:30 a.m. and I couldn't immediately get to sleep due to needing to eat, shower, and do the plethora of tasks needed to be done before going to bed for the day, meaning I was not able to get to sleep until around 12:30 and my train to work left at 13 o'clock. This was obviously untenable, and after trying to do a double, followed by a regular shift sans sleep a few times, I realized I was becoming a danger to my residents, my fellow staff members, and myself due to not being able to maintain concentration. In the end, I told my RN that on the Thursdays after a double, I would not be able to do my shift for fear of someone getting hurt, which would open the nursing home and myself to potential legal trouble, not to mention someone suffering because of my choices. So this had been happening for about 6 months now, when I get called up to the office of the owner, who promptly sat me down and berated me for taking every second Thursday off and not being a team player. I tried to explain why it was that I was taking those Thursdays off, but she would not listen, so in the end I walked out with a write-up and a threat of termination if this behavior continued. Fast forward to the next Wednesday when, as usual, the other nurse called in 20 minutes before the shift started saying she could not make it, leaving us a nurse down for the night. So only one person on for that entire shift would be a registered nurse, and you cannot lift or assist people with only one person without using a hoist, and even then you are meant to have 2 people for safety reasons. The nurse in charge of afternoons rolled her eyes after the call and said, "Looks like you're doing another double-bearded guy." To which I replied, I cannot, and since staying until agency staff get here is not an option, since I wouldn't be able to get home, I suggest you call the owner and see what she recommends. And if she needs me to stay, I will, but only if she gives me the direction herself and then confirms it with you. After 10 minutes, the owner had not answered any attempts to call, and I said, "Sorry, I have to leave." And the RN for the night shift began to get angry, to which I responded, "I will get fired if I stay here and then need to take tomorrow off, or someone could get harmed if I stay and then work. Neither of these are a great outcome, so I just have to go." Now I knew that they were never going to be able to get agency staff with such short notice, and that even by the slimmest of chances they could find someone, it would be several hours between registering the request and someone actually showing up. So then I walked out the door and hung around the corner for half an hour, knowing I would get a call sooner rather than later and that I needed to be close by in order to get back and ensure my residents got the care they needed overnight and had my idiot grin to wake up to in the morning, especially for the 3 people who loved early morning showers. The call came, I returned, and 2 nights later I got a call from the owner who authorized me to work doubles as needed and take the next day off for safety reasons. As far as I know, the nurse who did the late call-ins was still working there when I left a year later. In the end, my residents got the care they deserved and I got to get some sleep after working 15 hours straight. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Neighbors' guests parked on my property. I chained their cars together and towed them off my land. Hey everybody, I wanna tell you about my neighbor who thinks it is okay to tell his guests to park on my property. I live on a little bit of a larger area of land that is basically a farm. The other people that live near me just live in normal homes, so even though I am a farmer, none of my neighbors are. It usually works out without problems except for one neighbor specifically that I have a constant problem with. My problem with him is actually quite simple. He is a total butthole. Most people around here show respect for their neighbors, but this guy seems to think he is the only person in the world that matters. He disrespects me and all the other neighbors he sees every chance he gets, which on its own is bad enough. The parties that he throws though are what gets really out of hand. He had at least 1 party a week and blasts loud music while him and his friends get drunk. He does not try to contain the party inside his home either, so in the middle of the night they are out in the streets screaming and waking everyone else on the block up with their shouting. Any farmer knows that we have to be awake at the crack of dawn to start working, not to mention other neighbors that have jobs and cannot live with being kept up half the night with neighbor and his parties. But you can see from the title that this story really is not about the parties that he throws, since honestly nobody has ever done anything about them. No, instead I need to tell you about where the people who are coming to his party decide to park. And that is right on my grass, where I don't want them to be. I have tried catching them parking to tell them that they couldn't do it, to even putting up signs telling them it was private property. After being ignored in all those ways for a while, I finally went and tried to talk to neighbor about where his guests were parking. I did not mention the noise from the parties because several people already tried, so I was going to focus on my big issue with the parking. Me? Some of your guests from last night parked on my grass again. Neighbor, so? Me, so? Are you seriously acting like this is an okay thing to do? It is my property and I'm asking you to tell them not to park there. It ruins my grass and I don't want them there. Neighbor, I told them to park there. You have all that space and they are going to be gone before you wake up in the morning. I don't see the big deal. Me, the big deal is that it is my property and I'm telling you that they are not allowed to park there. A couple of things I want to quickly address to get out of the way. The first being, yes, the cars are usually gone or mostly gone by the time I start my day, which means they are probably getting in their cars and driving off my property drunk. The fact a fence has not been broken is short of a miracle at this point. The second more obvious thing is that most people would be asking me right now why nobody has called the police or had these cars towed. That is a common thing I see in a lot of these stories, so I have to explain why that was not possible. I live in a small area of a small country, and to keep things short, the police are useless. I don't mean that they wouldn't help, I basically mean that they wouldn't come at all, and the ones that do would usually be getting paid off by whichever side could give them money. Basically, if I called the police and they actually came, neighbor would just slip them some money and they would leave. As for towing the cars, well, there are not any tow trucks where I live. There is a couple of tow yards where towed cars can get dropped off, but they don't actually have trucks or drivers to do it. The only few tow trucks belong to the police, so I had to figure out another way I was going to deal with these people. I was in luck though, because what neighbor didn't know was that the guy who ran the local tow yard was actually my cousin. I went over and talked to him, and he mentioned that some farmers, since they have the equipment, can bring the cars to the tow yard themselves, and once it is there, they have to pay a fine to get it out. This gave me a wonderful idea, but first I wanted to give the guests one final chance. Don't ask me why, I just have a big heart and like giving people the benefit of the doubt right up until the last minute. My next step was that I got a big sign to place on my property, and on it it had written that there was no parking or the cars would be towed away. I placed it right where the guests tended to park, and then I waited for neighbor to throw his next party. Of course, it did not take long, and because of the noisy music, basically telling me right away I didn't even need to keep my eyes out. After a couple of hours, I went out and saw 3 cars parked not only on my property, but right in front of the sign. I went to get some chains and hook all 3 cars up together before getting the truck I use for farming. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact word in English, and using it to tow all 3 cars down the block where my cousin was expecting me. All 3 got put into the tow yard, and now the only thing that was left to do was wait for them to find out their cars were gone and freak out. Of course, that moment came when they were bashing on my front door with neighbor all drunk and screaming about the missing cars. I told them that the sign said they would get towed and told them where their cars were taken to. Then I promptly slammed the door right in their faces. I know that the whole revenge should have been the most satisfying part, but let me tell you, slamming the door in the face of a bunch of drunk jerks is a special kind of good feeling. This is where the story might end for some, but there is a little bit more of an ending. My cousin told me that a few days later the guys came to get their cars and each had to pay the large fine to get them back. They apparently cursed him out, which is sadly something he is used to in his line of work, and threatened to call the police. The only good news is that while the police can be bribed to a degree, everything I did was totally legal, so me and my cousin are safe. I guess the word got around about the parking because it became less of a problem after that. It has only been a few months and I've only had 1 or 2 stray cars parked on my property that I knew of. With both of those, I pointed out the sign and warned them what would happen, and then they moved. I know it is not the best ending in the world because my neighbor is still a butthole who throws loud parties at night, but now that I have my property back to myself, I feel like it is good enough until someone finds a solution to the rest of his problems. And yeah, ripe stars, I would say that is simply a step in the right direction, and it shows the neighbor that he cannot just do as he pleases because there will be consequences. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. And also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much, and I will see you again tomorrow.